Hello there and welcome to Why You Lost, this time with the Greenskins versus the Empire. This is sent to me by Pizzario, so thanks to him for sending me the replay. And as a Greenskins player, this is a matchup that's close to my heart, so I thought it's one I'd cover as I hate seeing the Greenskins lose to the Empire because honestly they're usually pretty easy to beat. It is a good matchup for the Greenskins, but most people just play Empire wrong against the Greenskins, so that's why they end up losing. And in this case, this guy's army isn't fantastic for taking on the Greenskins, but of course he is going to manage to get it done today. Now this map is a very hilly one, Duskwatch Plateau, which could make things difficult if you try to be a rush army or something. All these hills might slow you down. But let's look at Pizzario's army. So he's got 4 units of Orc boys up front. That's all well and good. That'll do just fine against the Empire infantry. And then on his flanks, he's got a bunch of big boys, 2 units of Savage Orc Biggins. These are one of the best units going on the Greenskins roster, probably my favourite unit in the game. He's got 2 of those on either side, so 4 units of Savage Orc Biggins altogether. He's got 3 units of missiles, Orc Araboys. These are okay missiles and they can be okay in melee. He's got 2 Doomdiver catapults, so he's going fairly ranged here. And then in the middle, he's just got some 8-peak loonies. Always good to have in the Greenskins. Their unbreakableness makes them very valuable. Now to his Lord and Hero, which is where his first major mistake is. He's got the Orc War Boss and 2 Goblin Big Bosses on spiders. What's the problem here? That's right. He's got no freaking caster, a tremendous waste of a valuable resource. And the double big boss suggests that he's going to try and goon the enemy lord, which is never a great strategy to look for. Also, the Orc War Boss is just a bit of a meh lord. Unless you put him on his wyvern, he can be a little bit different and have more uses, but otherwise, there's probably better lords to take. Now the enemy army, he's got spearmen up front, which is all well and good, just cheap infantry. 2 units of great swords, a unit of regular swordsmen. Reichsguard at the back, he's got the Altdorf Griffites on his flank, hidden away in the trees. On his other flank, he's got some Empire Knights. And then for his ranged, he's just got the Silver Bullets, some Stalky handguns, and then just some regular handguns here as well. And his lord is Volkmar on his War Altar. Also has a Mage of Life. So, not a terrible army for taking on the Greenskins, but I would say he doesn't have enough cavalry. He's trying to beat the Greenskins at their own game, which is the infantry fight. It's where Greenskins are strong and Empire are weak, but yet, that's what he's trying. Now, other than not having a caster as one of the biggest problems in this army, he's also positioned himself very strangely. His front line is on the downward slope of a hill, so he has to run uphill to fight his enemy. If you've seen my hidden mechanics video, you'll know that fighting uphill is very bad for you, as it means you'll take more damage, do less damage, and take more fatigue and be slowed down and everything else. So it's really not good to be fighting uphill. Also, because he's got 2 Doomdivers, he's got the ranged advantage here. He doesn't need to push on his enemy. He should be looking for a strategic high ground advantage as he has that ranged power. And obviously, we don't want to be cheese lords and be right at the back of the map, but you could deploy about here. I think the deployment zone would allow him to deploy here. If not, he could just move back. Plenty of room here for the enemy to flank, so keeping it nice and fair. But this is a decent position to set up. It's on a hill, so the enemy is going to have to fight uphill. Only a little bit, but it's still something. You could also use the trees there to hide some units in. So there's lots of advantages just to moving his army back a bit. If he couldn't deploy there, he could still move back now. So think carefully about where you position your army on the map because it can make a big difference and give you a big disadvantage if you fight the uphill battle. One thing he is doing well though is his formation. He's got nice gaps between his units. Some of them may be a little bit too big, but mostly okay. He's spread out his archers and his artillery, so that's good as well. He's got his flanks protected by the Biggins. 2 units over there, 2 units over there. So I've got some strong flank protection from those Biggins. He's also got the 8-peak loonies back here, kind of protecting the artillery, so they're always useful. He's focus firing as well, an important target, the greatsword. So good choice on the targeting, getting some good damage on these greatswords and some handguns that happen to have run inside the same area. So getting some good damage there on those 2. Focus firing them down with both Doomdivers as well, a good call. So nice work taking out the greatswords. They are the threat to the army here. One of the threats anyway, the cavalry is the other one. But at this point in the battle, he's not really doing much. He doesn't have much to micro, so this is where he should be preparing for what's coming towards him. And that means rearranging his army a little bit. Looking at this side of the Empire army, not a lot of threats. This side, not a lot of threats. Some beaten up greatswords, but in the center is where most of the danger is. There's a fresh unit of greatswords, so there's this little box of doom coming. There's greatswords in there, there's Volkmar, there's Reichsguard back here, which are going to come at that angle probably as well. Handguns and greatswords here, dangerous, but they are beaten up at this point. But at the moment, that little box of death is heading straight for 1 unit of Orc boys, and the one that's got to fight uphill. So, what do you think's going to happen there? How's that going to go? They're obviously going to get slaughtered. So, you need to prepare. He's got 2 units of Savage Orc Biggins over here, so he could spare 1 to come to the center, maybe spare another one from the other side, so you've still got protection for your flanks, but now you're bolstering where the enemy threats are coming to. Obviously, there still are some threats out on the flanks, which we can't really see, but he's still got one unit of Savage Orc Biggins over here if he did this. That'll deal with these Empire Knights, so you'll be able to deter them. On the other side, I think there's the Altdorf Griffites somewhere. I don't think they're coming right round, though. At this point, you can't see them, so you know you're not really in any immediate danger from anything, even if they were hidden over there. So you could definitely spare one of them to come over and help with the front line. And Savage Orc Biggins are an incredibly versatile unit. They can beat Great Swords one-on-one because their armor-piercing damage doesn't help them against Savage Orcs. They can beat up Volkmar because they're anti-large, and they can beat up the Cavalry because they're anti-large. So they're really the perfect unit for this situation to help this front line. But unfortunately, Pozzario doesn't know this, so he's going to have a hard time on his front line. Bit of a banishment coming in here on his archers. Doesn't do a great deal to him. Volkmar charging in on these Orc boys here. You can see these are the ones that have to fight uphill. And there's some spearmen coming up behind them as well as they give chase to Volkmar. So they're going to have a hard time. Going to give a little advantage to those spearmen, making him fight uphill. Sending in his little goon party after Volkmar. Gets a bit of damage done. Volkmar gets the hell out though. Charges through his unit wisely. Not much movement from the Greenskins army. He has charged up the hill here and managed to get the fight there. So he's not fighting uphill with that unit. Getting one of his Doom Divers a bit blasted. Cavalry's coming in over this side. A little bit of a weird column formation. Is he going to notice? Is he going to notice? Yes, he is. Just in the nick of time. He gets a double charge from both his Savage Orcs on these boys. That's going to do a nice bit of damage. He's going to manage to get them a little bit sandwiched, but the enemy is going to get straight out of there. He's not stupid. Doesn't want to get caught between those Savage Orcs. In the center, the Orc boys have broken. One of the big bosses have broken. The Altdorf Griffites have arrived. So that's going to make it an extra hard time for these boys. Again, if those Savage Orc Biggins were there, this would have been a different story. His Reichsguard coming through. Look like they're going to get some archers. The Savage Orc Biggins on the hill finally coming down. See, this is what they need to do. They just needed to do it about 2 minutes ago and be down on that front line. So just a little bit of a micro error there maybe. Or maybe just not the foresight to see that coming. But that's just part of being a newer player. No big deal there. Two Savage Orc Biggins here, so this is a little bit dangerous potentially because these two Savage Orc Biggins are getting a little bit out of position. They're far away from the rest of the army now. And this is just a micro error, it's not a huge deal, but they're chasing the cavalry, but they're getting far away from all the other places where they might be needed right now. One of those could be hammering on those Griffites, one of them could be hammering on Volkmar, these Reichsguard as well. So lots of things they could be doing to be very useful right now. Could get after these great swords, help these Orc boys. Like I said, Savage Orc Biggins can beat Great Swords. You might not think it because one is armor piercing, one isn't. But the Savage Orc Biggins don't care about armor piercing because they don't have any armor on anyway. And they have the physical resistance instead. They have such high weapon strength and melee attack. They do so much damage, especially if they have Frenzy going on, which they normally do. Especially if they have War going on. If you give them an Earwig Go spell, they just get absolutely disgusting. So they're great against a lot of these Empire units, especially with that anti-large bonus as well. His Lord over here getting a bit trapped up with Volkmar. His other big boss is broken. So again, maybe trying a bit too hard to get the Lord dead with the two big bosses. Griffites are going to surround the Orc War Boss now, and he is going to be in some serious, serious trouble. He's got plenty of health at this point, but it won't take those Griffites long to get rid of that. So I think that's most of the problems. He also doesn't have anything in his army that's really good for pushing on the enemy, as he's gone for the defensive strategy. But that's really bad because he has nothing that can do anything about these handgunners other than some infantry which will have to run uphill, and they'll probably get blasted by this unit before they get to them. So really not good to let these units sit there. They also do more damage because they're higher up than a lot of the targets that they're shooting at. So really not a good idea to let these units sit here and keep blasting. Does have these archers here. The Arrow boys could come over and take them on actually, because those Arrow boys are good in melee. They'd beat the crap out of handgunners. So they could be a choice to get after them, although you know they would be vulnerable to getting shot themselves. But this battle at the moment is looking actually quite good for the Greenskins. A lot of green flags around. He's just lost his Lord though. His Orc War Boss has just been broken by the Griffites, so that's pretty huge. He's routed straight off as well. His flag is completely gone. So that's a big leadership penalty for the Orcs, which obviously is pretty bad because the Orcs have low leadership anyway. But he's beaten away a lot of the infantry at this point. He's got a hold of the Altdorf Griffites with the Savage Orc Biggins. The Healing Caster is still around though, so there may be some things that come back into the fight a little bit more. Volkmar's kind of tied up here, but this is where he kind of goes all in to get after Volkmar. Starts to clump up a little bit. Some Empire Cav coming in. But this is dangerous with some of those abilities that Volkmar has. The Banishment as well. That could be very dangerous for big groups of ill-armored Greenskins. This unit's still fighting on, taking on the Spearmen. But for the most part, it's pretty close. It's not a one-sided battle by any means. Here comes a Banishment though, as I just mentioned. It's going to go through a couple of units of Savage Orcs as well. Goes a nice direction for the Empire. Works out a treat, does a lot of damage. And a lot of his boys are still running into it, so he's got to be careful of that. Got to try and run them away from it. Getting after Volkmar again. Starting to bunch up still. A little bit too much going after him. He's going to drop a Grand Soulfire. Not a great placement, but it is going to do a little bit of stuff. If he put that like here, maybe here, that would have done some absolute freaking murder. That would be the end of the battle right there. But either way, the Orc War Boss is gone. The leadership penalty is going to bring the Greenskins down, and that's going to be the end of it. So a valiant effort from Pizzario. Nearly got it. Just needed to correct a few things, change a few things in the build, and he would have been good to go. And this should have been a fairly easy win. Even with his build currently, he could have still won this for sure. Correcting the two big mistakes, not bringing a caster and being a little bit badly positioned on the hill, could have changed the battle if those two things were corrected. But nearly had him. Now let's take a look at his build, have a talk about it, and talk about what else we could do against the Empire in this situation. So this is Pizzario's army. Let's start with the Orc War Boss. As I mentioned, not a fantastic Lord choice. If you put him on the Wyvern though, he is a bit more versatile and useful because he can fly around. So if you're going to bring him, you really want to put him on the Wyvern. A better choice though, I think, is the Night Goblin Big Boss. For the same amount of money pretty much, you can get a Night Goblin Big Boss, whack him on his Squig, which will make him nice and quick. He has the Fermented Fungi ability, which will make the enemy lose control of a unit, good on Lords, and also the Tormentor Sword item, which will lock units in place, which is great for controlling that Empire cavalry. So yeah, if you want a cheap Lord, better off with the Night Goblin Big Boss than the Orc War Boss probably. The two goblins, like I said, if you are going to bring the War Boss, you need to get rid of one of these big bosses and replace it with a caster. Or alternatively, get rid of the Orc War Boss. You could bring Wurzag or Azag or the Goblin Great Shaman, one of those casters as your Lord, and then you could bring two Goblin Big Bosses and get after the Lord. But probably a better way to get after the Lord is with the Night Goblin Shaman. You can take off most of his abilities, or all of them if you want, and most of his spells. All you really need to leave is Vindictive Glare. It's a magic missile, great for sniping at Lords, only costs 4 magic. Very powerful, short cooldown as well. So that could be a great choice to bring if you do want to go after a Lord. It'll have an easier time getting the Lord than a Goblin Big Boss might. Power recharge rate slowdown is also a useful debuff to take. I like to take that sneaky stealing. So yeah, a couple of ways you could set up to bring magic in a Greenskins army. We'll reset the army, get it back to how it was. Now to the Orc Boy frontline, this is fine against the Empire. They can beat or do well against a lot of their cheaper units. The Savage Orc Biggins, also a good choice. As I said, very versatile against the Empire. And then he's got his ranged units, the 3 arrows and the 2 Doom Divers, which on this map might not actually be a bad strategy to go for the ranged options. Because it's very hilly, you could set up in a nice defensive position and catch the Empire out. And that is what he said he was trying to do. Instead of playing rush like the enemy would expect, he went for range. But I think he needed to commit a bit more to the ranged, maybe with an extra Doom Diver, or some more missile units, or some skirmish cavalry would have been good. But that could have been a bit risky against the Empire. With all their cavalry, if they had 5 or 6 units of cavalry, you may have had a hard time defending all of this ranged. So there is that to worry about with the Empire, and that's really how the Empire should face the Greenskins, with a lot of cavalry. Now, my go-to Greenskins build for facing the Empire is this. It's all about overrunning them and making them cry. So I've got Wurzag as my Lord. He's the go-to magical Lord, very powerful Lord. Got him on the boar, of course. Never have Wurzag on foot, he's too squishy. Gonna have Here We Go. Sometimes I might take Foot of Gork, sometimes I might take Brainburster. Depends on the faction. The Empire is quite lightly armored, so Brainburster works well, as Foot of Gork is a little expensive and maybe not necessary. Got a Goblin Big Boss, mostly as a bodyguard to Wurzag. Simple enough. My front line is Orc Boys, good for taking on most of that Empire infantry. Nasty Skulkers, fantastic for basically pinning things in place, although it's just a slow, but it's really slow. Great against the Empire Cavalry, great against Empire Lords for pinning them and allowing you to get some damage on them. 8 Peak Loonies, great unit, especially if you Vanguard deploy them. You can sneak up on some artillery or some missiles, unbreakable as well. Biggins to protect against the cavalry a little bit, more to protect those flanks. And then lots of cavalry. 5 units of Orc War Boys that I all bring in from one side to completely overwhelm one side. And 2 or 3 of those units may get stuck on enemy cavalry, but some will get through and they can hammer and anvil the back of the front line or take out some missiles. And then 2 units of Skirmish Cav, always useful to have these in case there's a Flying Lord like Karl Franz. Without these, I wouldn't be able to do anything about him in the sky, so having these can just put some pressure on him and allow me some anti-large as well. So that's my go-to Empire build. However, in the situation of this map, this build might not be great, because there's a lot of hills to run up, so my flank might not work so well. My cavalry is going to get really slowed down running up all those steep hills, so this build might not be great. So what would I do if I was on this map? Well, we have a couple of Lords which don't have a problem with terrain, and that is any Flying Lord, which is Azag or the Orc War Boss on their Wyvern. So I'm going to go for Azag, because that also gives me the magic, and Azag is a pretty good Lord now. We're going to hold on to all of his abilities, all of those could be useful. For the spells, we're going to lose Una, the Sun, keep Soul Blight, keep Doom and Darkness, keep Spirit Leech, get rid of Aspect. And that'll do me, I think. All of those potentially useful against the Empire, especially that armor reduction on some of that heavy cav. Not going to bring any of his other abilities to support. Instead, I'm going to bring a Black Orc Big Boss to support. He's got a lot of great abilities. Going to get rid of the damage ability and instead bring the other melee attack buff. So that'll do. So nice buffs to my front line. He's going to stick in with the front line while Azag is off doing other stuff, flying around. 4 units of Orc Boys for the front line. They can be helped by that Big Boss. Be a lot tougher than they might originally be. Couple of Savage Orc Biggins, just like Pizarro did. Only 2 though, I think. They can deal with everything Empire. Might have to watch out for the missiles though. For cavalry, as I said, Orc War Boss is going to get slowed down by those hills too much. So what could be a good pick here is Forest Goblin Spider Riders because of the Strider ability. Which means they won't get slowed down by the hills or take any combat penalties. So they'll be just fine running around all over those hills. And we can outmaneuver the enemy a little bit with our speed. As I mentioned before, going to need some kind of ranged units in case there's Karl Franz or something flying around. They can also do work on cavalry, so we'll bring the 2 Regiment of Renown Skirmishers. Still got a lot of money left. What should we do? Could bring a couple of nasty Skulkers to help pin stuff down. If that cavalry comes after us, we can pin them with the smoke bomb and then get the Savage Orc Biggins on top of them and they will absolutely pulverize them. So they could be a nice combo. Still got some money left though. What should we do? 1400. Could bring some Stone Trolls. Or 2 if we get rid of some of those. And then we can bring 2 units of Stone Trolls. They can go in with the front line. They'll also be supported by the Big Boss, which could make for a pretty disgusting front line, which the Empire will definitely struggle with. They are not going to like Stone Trolls on their infantry. So we could go for that. I think I like that. I would give that a try. Might be rubbish, might be amazing, but I think it would be alright and we can deal with most of the threats of the Empire. We've got a bit of cav that can pressure missiles and take on cav a little bit. They're obviously going to struggle against cav by themselves, but with some support from other stuff, they might be able to take out Empire Knights and such. So yeah, I think I would give that a go. There is an option for Greenskins versus Empire on a particularly hilly map like Duskwatch Plateau. So there we go. Pizarro and his Greenskins. A valiant effort, but not quite enough. Gork and Mork will surely punish him. Thanks to Pizarro for sending me the replay. Thanks to you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll see you in the future.